Dakota Territory. March 18 for 7. The blood on her wedding dress told a story that would haunt Ezekiel Morrison. For the rest of his days, she sat there by Willow Creek, shaking like a leaf in autumn wind, her torn white gown trailing in the muddy water. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and when she looked up at him with those green eyes that held more pain than any woman should bear, he knew his solitary life was about to change forever. What he didn't know was that saving her would save himself, and that beneath all that fear and sorrow lay a strength that would reshape his entire world. Ezekiel had been riding the fence line of his modest ranch when he heard the sobbing. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as he guided his bay mare closer to the creek, the sound became unmistakably human. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cottonwoods, and there she was, a vision in white that belonged in a church, not sitting alone by a creek miles from anywhere. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The woman looked up at his approach, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She couldn't have been more than 22, with delicate features that spoke of gentle breeding, but her eyes held the wild look of a cornered animal. "Ma'am," Ezekiel removed his hat, his voice gentle. "Are you hurt?" She tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely keep them clasped in her lap. The wedding dress, he could see now, was torn at the shoulder, and there were scratches on her arms. "Easy now," he said, taking a step closer. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Ezekiel Morrison. I've got a ranch about 2 miles from here." The woman drew a shuddering breath. I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the babbling creek. "Can't what, ma'am? Go back." The words came out in a rush. "I can't go back to him." Ezekiel felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen enough in his 35 years to recognize the signs. "Who, ma'am? Who can't you go back to?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to decide whether she could trust this tall, weathered man with kind brown eyes and calloused hands. "My husband," she said finally. "Though I suppose he's not really my husband. Now, what's your name?" "Evangeline," she said. "Evangeline Hartwell, or I was going to be Evangeline Blackwood," but she gestured helplessly at her ruined dress. Ezekiel knelt down beside her, careful to keep his distance. "Miss Hartwell, it's going to be dark soon, and it gets mighty cold out here at night. Why don't you come back to my place? You can tell me what happened, and we'll figure out what to do." Evangeline shook her head frantically. "He'll find me. Marcus will find me, and when he does..." She shuddered. "This Marcus fellow, he the one you were supposed to marry?" She nodded. "Today. This afternoon. But when I saw what he did to that..." "Poor girl," her voice broke off. Ezekiel felt his jaw tighten. "What girl?" "The Indian girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. She was cleaning the church before the ceremony. And Marcus, Evangeline covered her face with her hands. "I couldn't marry a man like that. I couldn't, so I ran." The pieces were falling into place, and Ezekiel didn't like the picture they formed. "You ran from your own wedding. I grabbed my horse and rode as fast as I could, but the mare threw me about a mile back. I think she broke her leg." Fresh tears spilled down Evangeline's cheeks. "I've been walking ever since." Ezekiel stood up and extended his hand. "Miss Hartwell, I give you my word that no harm will come to you while you're under my protection. But we need to get you somewhere safe and warm." Evangeline looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. There was something in his face and honesty that seemed to reach right through her fear. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. The ride back to Ezekiel's ranch was quiet except for the steady clip-clop of his mare's hooves and the occasional sob from Evangeline, who sat in front of him on the saddle. He could feel her, trembling against his chest, and his heart went out to this fragile woman who had shown such courage. His ranch house was small but well-built, with a stone chimney and sturdy log walls. As they approached, his dog Rex came bounding out to greet them, tail wagging furiously. "He's friendly," Ezekiel assured her as he helped her down from the horse. "Rex, sit." The dog immediately obeyed, though his tail continued to wag. Evangeline managed a small smile, the first he'd seen from her. Inside, the house was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a few pieces of handmade furniture scattered around. Ezekiel quickly built up the fire while Evangeline stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. "There's a bedroom through that door," he said, nodding toward the back of the house. "You can rest there. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I don't want to put you out of your own bed, Miss Hartwell," Ezekiel interrupted gently. "You've been through enough today. Don't worry about me." He made her some coffee and found an old shirt of his that she could wear while her dress dried. When she emerged from the bedroom, swimming in his oversized shirt, she looked young and vulnerable. But there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. They sat by the fire, and slowly, the story came out. Marcus Blackwood was the son of a wealthy cattle rancher, and her father had arranged the marriage to settle some debts. She'd never met Marcus before today, but she'd heard rumors about his temper and his treatment of women. "When I saw what he did to that poor girl," she said, staring into the flames, "I knew I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't spend the rest of my life married to a monster." "What will you do now?" Ezekiel asked. Evangeline was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. I can't go home. My father will just try to arrange another marriage, and I have nowhere else to go." Ezekiel studied her face in the firelight. There was something about this woman that stirred feelings he thought he'd buried years ago. Maybe it was her courage, or the way she'd risked everything to do what was right. Or maybe it was simply the way she looked at him, as if she saw something in him that he'd forgotten was there. "You could stay here," he said quietly. Evangeline looked up, startled. "I couldn't impose. It wouldn't be imposing. This is a big territory, and it gets lonely out here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know this might sound crazy, but we could get married. A real marriage, I mean. You'd have protection, a home, and I could use a partner." Evangeline stared at him. "You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're brave enough to run from a bad situation. I know you have a kind heart. You risked everything to protect someone you didn't even know. And I know you're stronger than you think. But why would you want to marry me? I'm not bringing anything to this marriage. No dowry, no connections, nothing." Ezekiel reached over and gently took her hand. "Miss Hartwell, I've been alone on this ranch for 5 years. I built it with my own hands, but it's felt empty. When I look at you, I see hope. I see the possibility of something I didn't even know I was missing." Evangeline felt tears spring to her eyes again. "But these were different tears. You really mean it?" "I do. We could ride into town tomorrow and find the preacher. That is, if you're willing." She was quiet for so long that Ezekiel began to think he'd made a mistake. But then she squeezed his hand and looked up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Evangeline had slept fitfully, but when she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, she felt more rested than she had in weeks. Ezekiel had already been up for hours, doing the morning chores. "I thought we could ride into Millfield," he said over breakfast. "It's about 10 miles south. There's a preacher there, and we can get the license." Evangeline nodded, but he could see the nervousness in her eyes. "What if Marcus comes looking for me? He won't know where to look. And even if he did, he'd have to deal with me first." The ride to Millfield was pleasant. Ezekiel had found an old dress that had belonged to his sister, who had visited the previous summer. It was simple blue cotton, but it fit Evangeline well enough. She rode behind him on his horse, and he found himself enjoying the feel of her arms around his waist. Millfield was a small town, just a handful of buildings clustered around a main street. The preacher, Reverend Williams, was a kindly man with white hair and twinkling eyes. He asked few questions when Ezekiel explained that they wanted to be married, though he did raise an eyebrow at the haste. "Are you sure about this, miss?" he asked Evangeline gently. "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not to be entered into lightly." Evangeline looked at Ezekiel, who was standing quietly beside her. In the space of one day, this man had shown her more kindness than she'd received in years. "I'm sure, Reverend." The ceremony was simple. There were no flowers, no fancy dress, no guests. Just Evangeline, Ezekiel, and the preacher in the small wooden church. When Ezekiel slipped a simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, he explained quietly. Evangeline felt something shift inside her chest. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Williams said with a smile. Ezekiel looked at Evangeline questioningly, and she nodded. His kiss was gentle, respectful, but she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the sun streaming through the church windows. As they walked out of the church, now husband and wife, Evangeline felt as if she were stepping into a completely new life. The fear that had consumed her for the past day was still there, but it was tempered now by something else: hope. They were halfway back to the ranch when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Ezekiel reined in his horse and studied the approaching riders. "How many?" Evangeline asked, her voice tight with fear. "Looks like 4 or 5. Ezekiel's voice was calm, but she could feel the tension in his body. Could be anyone. But as the riders got closer, Evangeline's worst fears were confirmed. The man in the lead was Marcus Blackwood, and his face was thunderous with rage. "Get behind me," Ezekiel said quietly, helping Evangeline down from the horse. Marcus and his men. Evangeline recognized them as hands from his father's ranch pulled up in a cloud of dust. Marcus was a big man, with dark hair and cold blue eyes that held no warmth at all. Well, Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Look what we have here. The runaway bride and her rescuer." "Mr. Blackwood," Ezekiel said evenly. "You're on my land." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your land? This whole territory belongs to men like me, Morrison, and so does she." He pointed at Evangeline. "She's my bride. We had a deal." Had, Ezekiel emphasized. Past tense. The lady made her choice. "The lady," Marcus spat, "is a silly girl who doesn't know what's good for her." "Evangeline, get over here. We're going back to town, and we're going to finish what we started." Evangeline stepped closer to Ezekiel, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not going anywhere with you. Marcus, I saw what you did to that girl, and I know what kind of man you are." Marcus's face darkened. "That Indian girl, she was nothing. Just a little fun before the wedding. But if you want to make something of it, I already have." Evangeline said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I married him." She held up her left hand, showing the gold ring. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the ring, then at Ezekiel, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like madness. "You married him," he said softly. "You married this nobody?" "I married a good man," Evangeline replied. "Something you'll never be." Marcus's hand moved to his gun, but Ezekiel was faster. His Colt was in his hand and trained on Marcus before the other man had cleared leather. "I wouldn't," Ezekiel said quietly. "I've got no quarrel with you, Blackwood, but I will protect my wife." "Your wife?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Do you know what you've gotten yourself into, Morrison? Do you know who her father is? What kind of debts he owes?" "I know she's a good woman who deserves better than you," Ezekiel replied. "That's all I need to know." Marcus looked around at his men, who were shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. It was clear they hadn't signed up for a gunfight with a man who had the drop on them. "This isn't over," Marcus said finally. "My father has influence in this territory. We'll see how long your little marriage lasts when he hears about this." "Your father's welcome to come talk to me anytime," Ezekiel said. "But for now, I think you should leave." Marcus jerked his horse's reins savagely, causing the animal to rear. "Come on," he snarled to his men. "We're done here." As they rode away, Evangeline felt her knees go weak. Ezekiel holstered his gun and caught her before she could fall. "It's all right," he said softly. "They're gone. For now," Evangeline whispered. But Marcus was right about one thing. His father does have influence. What if he tries to have our marriage annulled? What if— "Hey," Ezekiel said, gently turning her face to look at him. "One thing at a time. We'll deal with whatever comes." The next few weeks passed quietly. Ezekiel taught Evangeline how to run the ranch, and she proved to be a quick learner. She could milk the cows, tend the chickens, and even help with the branding. More importantly, she brought a warmth to the house that Ezekiel hadn't realized he'd been missing. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Evangeline told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about the father who cared more about his gambling debts than his daughter's happiness. Ezekiel shared stories about building the ranch, about the loneliness of the past 5 years, about the dreams he'd almost given up on her. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something real between them. It wasn't the passionate love of storybooks, but it was something deeper, a partnership based on mutual respect and growing affection. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Evangeline was washing dishes when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw a group of riders, but these weren't Marcus and his men. These were official-looking men in suits, led by a large man with graying hair and cold eyes. "Ezekiel," she called softly. He came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw the riders, his face grew serious. "Stay inside," he told her. The lead rider dismounted and walked up to the porch. "You Morrison?" "I am. And you are?" "Judge Blackwood. I believe you know my son." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. "I've met him." "Then you know why I'm here." Judge Blackwood was a big man, used to getting his way through intimidation. "You've got something that belongs to my family." "I've got a wife," Ezekiel said evenly. "She belongs to herself. That girl was promised to my son. There were debts involved, agreements made. You've interfered with a legal contract." "There was no contract. The lady chose not to go through with the wedding. She's free to make her own choices." Judge Blackwood's face reddened. "Free? That girl's father owes me $15,000. The marriage was to settle that debt. Now, because of your interference, I'm out a daughter-in-law and the money. Take it up with her father." "I intend to. But first, I want the girl back. Annul this sham marriage, and I might be inclined to overlook your part in this." Ezekiel stepped down from the porch, his hands loose at his sides. "Judge, I'll say this once. The lady is my wife, legally and properly married. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Now, I suggest you leave my property." "You don't know who you're dealing with, Morrison," the judge snarled. "I can make life very difficult for you, maybe, but I can make it very difficult for your son if he keeps bothering my wife. I hear tell he likes to force himself on women who can't fight back. That's a dangerous habit in this territory." The judge's face went purple. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating facts. Now get off my land." For a moment, it looked like the judge might try something, but then he seemed to remember that he was outnumbered. Ezekiel's nearest neighbors, the Carson brothers, had ridden up during the conversation and were sitting their horses with rifles across their laps. "This isn't over," the judge said, echoing his son's words from weeks earlier. "It is as far as I'm concerned," Ezekiel replied. After the men rode away, Evangeline came out of the house. She was pale but composed. "Thank you," she said to the Carson brothers. "No thanks needed, ma'am," the older brother, Jake, replied. "We heard there might be trouble. Ezekiel's a good neighbor." That night, as they lay in bed, they'd been sharing the bed for 2 weeks now, though their marriage remained chaste. Evangeline turned to her husband. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your life." Ezekiel rolled over to face her, in the moonlight streaming through the window. Her eyes looked like emeralds. "Evangeline, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. You haven't brought trouble, you've brought joy." "But the judge is a bully who's used to getting his way. He'll try to cause problems, but he can't undo what we've done." Evangeline was quiet for a moment. "Ezekiel, yes, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I want you to know that it's become more than that for me. I care about you more than I thought possible." Ezekiel felt his heart skip a beat. "Evangeline, I know you married me out of kindness, and I don't expect." He silenced her with a kiss, gentle but filled with all the emotion he'd been holding back. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I didn't marry you out of kindness," he said softly. "I married you because from the moment I saw you by that creek, I knew you were going to change my life, and I was right." Their second kiss was longer, deeper, filled with weeks of growing love and trust. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The challenges came sooner than expected. The next morning, Ezekiel woke to find several of his cattle dead, apparently poisoned. Over the following days, more animals died, his water supply was contaminated, and his barn was set on fire. "It's the judge," Evangeline said after the barn fire. "He's trying to force us out." "Maybe," Ezekiel said grimly. but he's making a mistake if he thinks I'll give up easily." The campaign of harassment continued for weeks. Ezekiel lost nearly half his cattle, and his savings were dwindling as he tried to replace equipment and animals. But with each setback, his resolve only grew stronger. The breaking point came when they returned from town one day to find their house ransacked in wrecks. Their faithful dog, badly beaten. The dog survived, but just barely. "That's enough," Ezekiel said, his voice deadly quiet. "This ends now." He rode into town the next day, but not to the judge's house. Instead, he went to the territorial marshal's office. Marshal Thompson was an honest man who'd had his own run-ins with the Blackwoods over the years. "I need to file a complaint," Ezekiel said, laying out the evidence of the harassment campaign. "I've been wondering when you'd come in," the marshal said. "The judge has been getting sloppy. I've got witnesses who saw his men near your place on several occasions. Can you do anything? I can try, but the judge has friends in high places. It won't be easy." The confrontation came to a head 3 days later. Ezekiel was working on rebuilding his barn when Marcus and 6 men rode up. This time, Marcus wasn't trying to hide his intentions. "Time to end this, Morrison," Marcus called out. "My father's given me permission to handle this my way." Ezekiel straightened up, his hammer still in his hand. "And what way is that?" Marcus grinned. But it was a cold, cruel expression. "The permanent way. You're going to have an accident, and then my bride is going to come home where she belongs. Over my dead body. That's the idea." The 6 men spread out, hands hovering near their guns. Ezekiel was outnumbered, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He started to reach for his gun when a shot rang out from the house. One of Marcus's men cried out and grabbed his shoulder. Everyone turned to see Evangeline standing on the porch, with a rifle in her hands. "The next one goes through someone's heart," she called out, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You little..." Another shot rang out, this one from behind the men. Marshal Thompson rode into view, his badge glinting in the sunlight. Well, the marshal said calmly. "Looks like I got here just in time. Marcus Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy, destruction of property, and attempted murder." "You can't prove anything," Marcus snarled. "Actually, I can. Your father's not the only one with friends in high places. The territorial governor has been very interested in the reports I've been sending him about the Blackwood family's activities." The fight went out of Marcus like air from a punctured balloon. 2 of his men had already holstered their guns and raised their hands. The others looked around uncertainly. "It's over, Marcus," the marshal said. "You and your father have pushed too far this time." The arrest of Marcus Blackwood sent shockwaves through the territory. The subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of corruption and intimidation that reached all the way to the territorial capital. Judge Blackwood was removed from the bench and faced federal charges. Life at the Morrison Ranch slowly returned to normal, with the threat of the Blackwoods removed. Ezekiel was able to rebuild his herd and repair the damage to his property. But the real change was in his marriage. The crisis had brought him and Evangeline closer together. They were truly partners now, in every sense of the word. She proved to be not just a loving wife but a capable rancher, who could hold her own in any situation. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Evangeline turned to her husband. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, taking in a runaway bride. Ezekiel looked at her, this remarkable woman who had brought such joy and purpose to his life. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and her green eyes held the same hope he'd seen that first day by the creek, but now it was mixed with something else, deep, abiding love. "Never," he said, taking her hand. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even with all the trouble, especially with all the trouble, it showed me what we're made of, what we can accomplish together." Evangeline smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "I love you, Ezekiel Morrison, and I love you, Mrs. Morrison, more than I ever thought possible." As the stars came out one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The ranch around them was quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods by the creek where their story had begun. 6 months later, Evangeline stood in that same spot by Willow Creek. But this time she wasn't alone and afraid. She was watching her husband teach their neighbors' children how to fish, his patient voice carrying across the water as he showed them how to bait their hooks. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, smiling at the secret she would share with him tonight. Their family was going to grow, and the ranch that had once seemed so empty would soon be filled with the sound of children's laughter. The sight of her husband with the children filled her heart with such joy that she had to blink back tears. This man who had saved her from a terrible fate had given her something she'd never dared hope for: a real home, a true partner, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. When Ezekiel looked up and saw her standing there, his face lit up with the kind of smile that still made her heart skip a beat. He said something to the children that made them giggle, then walked over to her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Just this, us. How different everything is from that day I was sitting here in my torn wedding dress. Different good or different bad." She laughed and kissed him softly. "Different wonderful. I was so lost that day, so afraid. And now I'm home." They stood there by the creek where their love story had begun, holding each other as the Wyoming wind whispered through the trees. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges and joys, sorrows and triumphs. But whatever came, they would face it together. Ezekiel had thought he was saving a runaway bride that day. By the creek, what he'd really done was save himself, finding in Evangeline not just a wife, but a true partner who brought hope and love to a life that had been merely existing. And Evangeline, who had fled one terrible marriage, had found in this quiet, strong man a love that would last a lifetime. As the sun set over the Wyoming territory, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison walked back to their ranch house hand in hand, their hearts full of love and their eyes bright with hope for all the tomorrows that lay ahead. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.